The forest was burning, 2 boys were trapped, and out of the flames came something no one expected, an enormous bobcat, not to attack, not to flee, to lead. Behind her stumbled terrified teenagers, and at the end of the trail, an old man leaning on a cane, whispering her name like a prayer. They called her Echo, a predator the world had written off as dangerous. But what she did that night would leave an entire town speechless and force everyone to question whether wild instinct is really stronger than love, or if memory can outlast even fire itself. The first light over northern Maine never came gently. It scraped across the ridges like a blade on stone, cold and sharp, rolling off the pines in a grey wash that smelled of sap, damp moss, and frozen air. On that November dawn, the wind came first, low, steady, insistent, like a hand at the window, reminding anyone awake that winter was already here, whether the calendar said so or not. Samuel Whitaker eased himself out of bed with the slowness of a man who knew every ache before it arrived. 68 years had left him stiff in the knees, bent in the back, but not yet broken. He pulled on a flannel shirt, patched in the elbows, and shuffled toward the kitchen, the boards beneath him creaking as if they wanted conversation. The old lakeside cabin had stood here longer than him, longer than most people in the county, and it groaned in the wind like it remembered every storm. Sam filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and turned the dial on the little AM radio that had sat on the counter since Marjorie was alive. Static hissed, then a voice pushed through, brittle and urgent. Residents of Piscataquis and Penobscot counties are advised to remain indoors this morning following an incident at the Penobscot Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Unconfirmed reports suggest one of the large predators has escaped its enclosure. Local authorities are coordinating with wardens to secure the area. Please keep pets inside and avoid unnecessary travel. The kettle hadn't even begun to steam, but Sam reached for the chipped enamel mug anyway, pouring in yesterday's coffee from the pot he'd forgotten to empty. Bitter, cold, strong enough to chew. He sipped once, eyes fixed on the thin sheet of ice crawling over the lake outside the window. He didn't mutter a curse like most folks might have. Didn't sigh or shake his head. He just listened. Out there, the forest was wrong. No chickadees chattering in the birches, no woodpecker drilling at the far ridge, not even the restless flutter of squirrels that usually scattered across the snow. Silence sat heavy on the trees, pressing down like a hand on a heartbeat. Sam set the mug on the sill. His jaw tightened. He knew. It had been 15 years since the fire that tore across the logging land east of Moosehead Lake. 15 years since he'd carried out a bundle no bigger than a loaf of bread. Soot, blackened, half-burned, eyes glued shut, but still alive. He had broken every rule that night, tucked the creature into Marjorie's wool shawl, fed her milk from a bottle, and listened to the rasp of tiny breaths that refused to quit. They called her Echo, though Sam had never spoken her name much aloud. To him she was just girl, or little one, or sometimes nothing at all, just a presence by the wood stove, curled against his boots like she belonged. Until the day the state said no more, until the wardens hauled her away, claws raking at his coat, a cry that sounded too much like grief. Now the forest was silent again. The radio called it an escape. Sam knew better. She was coming home. At the Penobscot Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, the morning began with the kind of silence that always came before chaos. Rows of pine trees pressed against the chain-link perimeter, their needles rattling under the push of November wind. Inside the main building, screens flickered in the control room, coffee cups stood half-empty, and tired technicians fought yawns as they switched from night shift to day. Then the lights blinked. Once. Twice. A low hum surged through the wires, rattling the fluorescent panels above. "Power spike?" muttered Janet Riley, the senior night tech, tapping at the control board. Before anyone could answer, every monitor in the room cut to black, then flared back in a dizzy sequence of error codes. Locks clicked in the distance, dozens of them, a sound no one ever wanted to hear all at once. "Reset," Kyle Morgan said, barely 21, still green enough that his badge looked oversized on his chest. "System rebooted itself. That shouldn't even be possible." "Check the enclosures," Janet snapped. Her voice was sharp, but her hands trembled as she pulled up the security feed. One by one, the cameras flicked on, the snowy pens and fenced yards stuttering into focus. Wolves accounted for, bears still pacing behind bars. The mountain lion yawned, stretching as if nothing had happened. Then camera 12, the Bobcat pen, empty. The gate hung open, not smashed, not clawed through, but swinging freely as if someone had simply forgotten to latch it. Janet's mouth went dry. "No," she whispered. "Not her." Kyle leaned closer, squinting at the timestamp. "Echo's gone." The alarm sounded, red lights flaring. Klaxons echoing across the compound. Doors slammed, radios crackled, boots pounded on concrete. Within minutes, the center was a hive of panic. Wardens strapped on sidearms, tranquilizer rifles were loaded, helicopters were requested, though the nearest was still an hour out. Someone shouted over the comms, "Public alert! Get it out now!" By 7 a.m., half the county had heard the words, "Large predator escaped! Residents, stay indoors!" But Echo wasn't hunting, she was running. Out beyond the chain link, her paws pressed deep into frost, muscles rolling beneath scarred fur. She was heavier now, 90 pounds of muscle and memory, but she moved as if the years hadn't touched her. The scar above her right eye caught the light as she vanished into the trees, as silent as a shadow slipping between the trunks. No cage, no wall, no human plan had ever truly held her. The center thought she was unpredictable, a risk too great to be released, too bonded to humans to be trusted. They stamped her file with the word unrehabilitatable. But Echo had never forgotten the smell of cedar smoke, or the low hum of an old man's voice, or the warmth of a cabin stove. And now, free again, she followed it. 20 miles away, Samuel Whitaker sat on his porch with his coffee mug cooling in his hands. The lake stretched out before him like a sheet of hammered steel, ripples catching the faint light of morning. He wasn't listening to the radio anymore. He was listening to the forest. The silence was louder than any siren. A squirrel should have been scolding from the hemlock by now. Jays should have been arguing in the birches. Even the wind felt wrong, pushing too steadily from the west, carrying a weight that made the skin on Sam's neck prickle. "She's out!" He didn't need confirmation. He didn't need to hear the broadcaster's clipped tone, calling it a public safety concern. He didn't need the deputies driving down the logging roads telling folks to bolt their doors. Sam knew. He had known the moment the woods went quiet. 15 years had not dulled the memory. He saw it still when he closed his eyes, the fire roaring through dry pine, smoke choking the sky, the desperate sound of something small crying beneath a scorched log. He remembered scooping up the half-burned kitten, its fur matted, its breath ragged. He remembered Marjorie's gasp when he brought it home, her hands already moving for the towels, the goat milk, the old basket lined with flannel. He had raised Echo in secret against every regulation the state put in place because the alternative was death. At first, she was no bigger than his palm, mewling weakly through the nights. Then weeks later, she stalked through the cabin like she owned it, climbing onto his boots curling near the fire. Sam had told no one except Marjorie. When she died, the secret felt even heavier, but he carried it because he couldn't let her go until the state came knocking. Threats of fines, license suspension, even jail. He had no choice. They took Echo away. The last sound she made wasn't a growl. It was a howl, long and ragged, like grief in its purest shape. And now the silence outside told him what the world refused to believe. She remembered. The kettle on the stove hissed, steam rising, but Sam didn't move. He set down his cup and leaned on the porch railing, eyes narrowing at the tree line that bordered his land. The years had bent his spine, stiffened his joints, thinned his hair, but they hadn't dulled the sharpness of his gaze. Somewhere out there, through the frost and pine shadows, Echo was moving. Not toward the town, not toward livestock, not to kill. She was coming home. The knock on Sam Whitaker's door came sharp enough to rattle the window panes. 3 quick raps, then a pause, then 3 more. Not neighborly, not casual, official. Sam set his mug down and reached for the cane propped against the wall. He didn't rush, he never did. By the time he opened the door, 2 uniformed men stood on the porch, their boots wet with frost, breath steaming in the cold. Mr. Whitaker, the older of the 2, tipped his cap. His badge gleamed beneath the November grey. "I'm Ranger Doyle. This here's Officer Stevens. Sorry to bother you so early, but we're canvassing the area. You heard the news, I assume?" Sam didn't answer. He just studied the man's eyes, the way they darted from the cabin to the woods and back again, as if the trees themselves might lunge at him. "There's been an incident at the Penobscot Center," Doyle went on. "One of their large cats got loose, a bobcat, female, full-grown, about 90 pounds. Folks are calling her Echo." The name hung in the air like smoke. Sam felt it settle heavy in his chest. Doyle cleared his throat. "We're asking locals to stay alert. If you see anything, tracks, movement, livestock disturbed, you call us first. Don't approach. She's dangerous." Sam's voice came low, steady. "She's not dangerous, not unless you give her a reason." Stephen shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his partner. Doyle stiffened. "Sir, with respect, this animal is classified high risk. If she comes near people, we can't afford to hope she behaves." Sam leaned heavier on his cane, his faded eyes sharp. "You raise a hand to her," he said coldly, "and you'll regret it." The silence that followed was thick enough to chew. Doyle's jaw tightened, but he didn't press. He gave a curt nod. "We'll keep patrolling. Please, stay indoors." When they left, Sam closed the door without saying goodbye. His hands trembled slightly as he slid the deadbolt. He wasn't trembling from fear. He was trembling from rage. By late morning, the gravel driveway outside the cabin crackled with new tires. This time, it wasn't law enforcement. It was Clara. She climbed out of her mud-splattered Subaru, still in her veterinary scrubs, hair pulled back in a braid, frayed by the wind. At 27, she carried herself with both the exhaustion of someone stretched thin and the stubbornness of someone who refused to quit. "Grandpa," she said, the moment she stepped onto the porch. "Tell me it isn't true." Sam studied her. Same sharp green eyes as her mother, same habit of chewing her lower lip when she was nervous. "Depends what you think's true." She crossed her arms. "Echo, they're saying she escaped. Is it really her?" Sam didn't answer right away. He turned back toward the tree line, the silence pressing like a weight. Finally, he nodded once. "It's her." Clara exhaled, shoulders slumping. "Then she's as good as dead. You know what Doyle's like. The second he spots her, he'll pull the trigger." Sam's gaze didn't waver. "Not if I find her first." Clara stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Listen, I wasn't supposed to see this, but I checked the trail cams from the research grid up north. One caught her last night, heading toward the ridge, toward your old fishing cabin." The words struck him like a bell. The cabin. He hadn't set foot there in more than a decade. Too many memories, too many ghosts. But if Echo was heading there, it meant she remembered. Clara pulled her phone from her pocket, swiping quickly to a grainy clip. In it, a large shadow moved through the frost, lean and purposeful, tail low, ears forward. Even blurred, even half-lit, Sam knew every line of that body. "She's going back," Clara whispered, "to where you raised her." Sam's hand clenched on his cane. He could almost smell the cedar smoke, hear the crackle of the old stove, feel the weight of fur curled across his boots. He turned back to Clara. "Then I'll meet her there." Her eyes widened. "Grandpa, you can't. They've got teams sweeping the woods. If they catch you out there, they won't." His voice was steady, final. "I know those trails better than any of them, and Echo knows me." Clara hesitated. She wanted to argue, but she saw it in his face, that immovable stubbornness that had carried him through mill strikes, storms, and Marjorie's death. Instead, she pressed a set of keys into his palm. "Take my car. It'll handle the logging road better than yours." Sam closed his fingers over the keys, his hand rough, scarred but steady. "You don't tell them where I've gone." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I wouldn't." For a long moment, neither moved. Just the sound of the wind pressing through the pines, the lake groaning under thin ice. Finally, Sam nodded. "I'll bring her home." Clara swallowed hard, blinking back tears she didn't want him to see. "Just come back with her. Don't make me lose both of you." Sam's jaw tightened. He didn't promise, but he didn't look away either. By dusk, the Subaru was gone from the driveway, its headlights cutting a narrow path into the forest roads that wound north toward the cabin. Behind him, the silence deepened, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. The road north hadn't changed in 20 years. It was still narrow enough that 2 trucks would scrape mirrors if they tried to pass, still littered with fallen branches, still gouged by ruts where spring meltwater carved its own course downhill. Sam drove slow, gripping the wheel tighter than his stiff fingers liked, headlights pushing a thin tunnel through the dusk. Clara's Subaru rattled over every stone, but it held. The cabin sat 5 miles in, past the ridge where the county had stopped maintaining the track. Few people ever came this far anymore. That was why Sam had built it here. That was why Echo might come back. By the time he pulled into the clearing, the last light was draining out of the sky. The cabin hunched in the gloom like it had been waiting all these years, its roof sagging, shutters askew, chimney capped in rust. Sam cut the engine. The sudden silence was so complete it rang in his ears. He sat for a moment, both hands on the wheel, forcing his breath steady. Then he opened the door. The air was sharp with pine resin and frost. Every step across the grass crunched like breaking glass. He carried a small duffel slung over his shoulder, the keepsakes he had brought deliberately, not food, not bait, but memory. Inside, the cabin smelled of old wood and dust. He pushed the door open with his cane, hinges squealing in protest. The floor sagged under his boots, releasing a puff of stale air. In the corner by the stove lay the stone hearth where he'd once laid a blanket for a half-burned kitten, too small to even open her eyes. Sam lowered the duffel, unzipped it, and pulled out the first item, a carved cedar fish. Edges worn smooth where tiny teeth had worried it years ago. He set it on the floor near the hearth. Next came a frayed wool blanket, once folded at the foot of his bed, the one Echo used to curl against. Finally, a dented tin box. He opened it carefully. Inside lay a single photograph. Marjorie smiling, Sam younger by decades, and a soot-stained bobcat kitten tucked in his arms like a child. He placed the photo upright against the stone, then lowered himself into the old chair by the wall. His knees groaned, his back complained, but he didn't move again. He just sat, listening. The woods pressed in with silence. Minutes dragged. His eyelids grew heavy, his breath slowing in rhythm with the creak of the stovepipe in the wind. Then a sound, not the wind, not a branch breaking, something heavier. A footstep through frost, deliberate, unhurried, then another. Sam's heart stumbled. He gripped the arm of the chair, forcing himself not to rise. His old instincts screamed at him to stand, to meet whatever came, but he stayed seated. He knew better. A shadow slid across the doorway. The shape was wrong for a deer, too fluid for a bear. Amber eyes glowed faint in the half-light. Echo. She stepped forward, silent as breath. Her coat was darker now, muscles rolling beneath the scars of years, her frame lean and powerful. But the dip in her right shoulder when she walked was the same, the little hitch she'd carried since that fire. 10 feet, 8, 5. She stopped. The air between them thickened until Sam could hear his own pulse in his ears. Her ears swiveled forward. Her tail flicked once. Her eyes, those same gold eyes that had watched him across the glow of a wood stove, fixed on him, unblinking. Sam swallowed, voice a rasp. "You came home?" The bobcat didn't growl, didn't charge. She just held him in her gaze, chest rising and falling in slow, steady rhythm. Sam lifted a hand, not reaching, just showing it. His fingers trembled in the air. "It's still yours," he whispered. "The bed by the fire, the blanket, all of it, always yours." Echo blinked once, slow, deliberate. Then her head tilted just slightly as if something half-forgotten had surfaced. The room stayed silent, but the silence was different now. Warmer. Alive. Sam leaned back, breath breaking in his chest. For the first time in 15 years, the cabin didn't feel abandoned. It felt like it remembered. And so did she. In town, the news spread faster than fire on dry pine. By morning, every diner booth and hardware store checkout line buzzed with the same word, Bobcat. Some folks swore they'd seen her in their yards. Others claimed she'd torn through livestock. Blurry photos popped up on Facebook. Shadows at the tree line, golden eyes caught in a flashlight beam, a shape too vague to be trusted, but frightening enough when paired with a caption. "Close call behind the Johnson barn. Tracks near the elementary school. Somebody better do something before a kid gets hurt." Most of it was rumor stacked on rumor, but fear didn't need proof. At the Penobscot Center, Ranger Doyle stood at the head of a folding table, littered with maps. His jaw was set tight, his knuckles white around a coffee mug. "We can't keep stalling," he barked at the assembled wardens. "This cat's been loose nearly 24 hours. Public's panicked. Next call we get might not be false." One of the younger officers shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, so far there's no sign she's attacked anything. Those chickens out by Bailey's place, tracks show it was a fox, not a bobcat." Doyle's eyes narrowed. "Fox or not, perception's what matters. People think she's a threat. She's a threat. End of discussion." He slapped a file onto the table. Echo's file, thick with warnings, stamped unrehabilitatable in bold red letters. "If we get a shot, we take it." But Clara wasn't buying it. At her apartment above the veterinary clinic, she scrolled through hours of old trail cam footage, fingers tight around her coffee. Then she found it, Echo captured just 2 nights earlier, slipping through the edge of a playground. The camera had caught the bobcat pausing beneath the swings, her head tilting upward. In the frame, a window glowed warm above the yard, a child's silhouette pressed to the glass. Echo didn't lunge, didn't growl. She just stared for a moment, quiet, then vanished back into the dark. Clara uploaded the clip with a single caption: "Is this danger or memory?" The post spread like frost across the county's feeds. Within hours it hit 1,000 shares. Some viewers cried hoax, others wrote long, trembling comments about dogs that remembered their owners after years apart, horses that recognized old riders. Fear still ran strong, but something else was stirring too: curiosity, wonder, doubt. Up in the woods, Sam cared nothing for the chatter. The stove in the cabin popped and sighed as pine logs burned low. Sam sat in his old chair, cane leaning against the wall, hands loose in his lap. Across from him, stretched on the frayed wool blanket like she had never left, Echo slept. Her sides rose and fell in deep rhythm, ears twitching at the smallest snap of the fire. Sam watched her the way a father might watch a child, finally at peace. Every scar told a story he hadn't been there to witness. Every line of muscle spoke of years he hadn't shared. But the curve of her body against the firelight, the way she tucked her nose against her paw, it was the same as it had been when she was no bigger than a rabbit. The world would call her a predator. To him, she was a memory made flesh, a thread tied between the years. He let his eyes close for a moment, listening not to silence now, but to something older, the sound of belonging. By the next morning, the county was split down the middle. Half demanded blood, half whispered miracle. And somewhere between the fear and the faith, a man and his bobcat sat together in a cabin that smelled of cedar smoke and dust, the quiet truth lying at their feet, warm and undeniable. The storm had been building for days, dry wind through brittle pine needles, the kind of air that smelled of smoke even when none burned. Everyone in town felt it, but it took only 2 boys with rifles and a bad idea to set the spark. They weren't hunters, not really. 16, maybe 17 at most. They were just angry, fueled by Facebook threads and parents' fear. They wanted to be heroes, the ones who brought down the monster before anyone else. So they drove their father's truck up the old logging trail, ignoring the "Do Not Enter" signs, carrying 2 rifles that rattled against the rear window. By dusk, they had reached the ridge near Sam's old fishing cabin. "This is where she's hiding," one whispered. "We'll flush her out. Easy." The other boy struck a match. What began as a small flame in a circle of dry brush leapt too quickly. The wind shifted, pine needles caught like tinder soaked in oil. Within minutes, orange fingers spread across the forest floor, snapping at roots, climbing trunks. The boys hadn't planned for that. By the time they realized their mistake, the blaze had already surrounded them. Sam and Clara smelled the smoke before they saw it. They had stepped outside the cabin at twilight, the woods still and unnervingly quiet, when a thin grey coil rose above the trees to the south. Then came the smell, sharp, acrid, wrong. "Fire," Clara said, voice tight. Sam gripped his cane harder. His bones ached, but his instincts flared sharper than they had in years. He knew how fast flames moved in a Maine pine stand, faster than men, faster than animals, faster than memory itself. "Echo," he muttered, scanning the tree line. She was gone. One moment she had been circling the cabin clearing, ears twitching at every sound. The next, she had bolted into the dark, low and silent, heading straight toward the smoke. Clara's eyes widened. "She's running into it." Sam's breath caught. "Not running, going!" By the time they reached the edge of the ridge, the fire was roaring like a freight train. Trunks cracked, sparks lifted into the wind, and smoke rolled so thick it stung their eyes. And there, at the center of it, Sam saw her. Echo crouched low beside a fallen log, body tense, tail pressed flat, Not hunting, not fleeing, guarding. Just beyond her, two boys huddled against a rock wall, pale with terror, their rifles abandoned in the dirt. The fire had cut off every escape but one, a narrow slope that wound along the creek bed. Echo stood between them and the flames, ears pinned, amber eyes glowing in the smoke. Sam stumbled forward, cane sinking into ash. His voice carried rough, but steady. "Don't move!" The boys whipped their heads toward him. Echo turned too, her gaze locking on Sam, and for a moment the fire seemed to pause with her. Sam raised his hands. "Easy, girl, I'm here." The older boy stammered, She's going to—" "No," Sam cut him off, his voice like iron. "She's holding the line." The boys didn't understand, not fully, but they obeyed the tone. Sam edged closer, smoke clawing at his throat, heat searing his skin. He pointed toward the creek bed. "That way, it's narrow, but it's clear. She'll show you." As if on cue, Echo stepped back, then turned, padding toward the slope. She paused, looking over her shoulder, waiting. The boys hesitated, then followed, stumbling after her, coughing, shaking. Clara gripped Sam's arm, helping him steady as they brought up the rear. The fire roared behind them, snapping branches, hurling sparks. But Echo led, swift and sure, weaving down the slope like she had known the path all her life. 30 minutes later, they burst out of the tree line into a gravel clearing where emergency crews were staging. The boys collapsed into the arms of waiting responders, faces streaked with soot. Clara gasped for air, clutching Sam's shoulder, and Echo. She stopped just inside the trees, watching, still as stone, chest heaving but eyes steady. She had brought them out, but she would not cross into the human chaos. Sam lifted one arm, ash smudging his sleeve. "Good girl," he rasped. For a heartbeat, she blinked slow, deliberate. Then she turned and vanished into the smoke. That night, the town would tell stories about fire and fear, about two boys nearly lost, about a rescue that should have been impossible. But Sam knew the truth. It hadn't been impossible at all. It had been Echo. The footage wasn't meant for history. It was shaky, grainy, filmed on a panicked phone as fire crews scrambled in the chaos. But sometimes history doesn't ask for polish. It just demands proof. The video began with smoke billowing through the pines, voices shouting in confusion. And then there she was. Echo. The bobcat stepped out of the fire's glow, shoulders rolling, fur streaked with ash. Behind her stumbled two boys, coughing, terrified, their faces streaked with soot. And at the end, leaning on a cane, Samuel Whitaker emerged from the haze, one hand lifted toward the cat, as if steadying the entire world. The clip lasted only 32 seconds, but by morning, half the county had seen it. By noon, half the state. By nightfall, the country. Bobcat saves teens in Maine wildfire. Predator or protector? The miracle at Baxter Ridge. Every headline found its own angle, but the video needed no words. It showed what it showed, a wild animal not attacking, not fleeing, but leading, protecting. At the Penobscot Center, Ranger Doyle slammed his fist against the table so hard the maps jumped. "You call that proof? That's chaos caught on a cell phone." She could have panicked. She could have been driving them toward danger just as easy. Across from him, younger wardens traded glances. No one spoke, but doubt lingered in the room. They had all seen the clip. The bobcat hadn't looked wild in that moment. She had looked deliberate. "Sir," one finally said, "whatever her intent, she got those kids out alive." Doyle's glare silenced him. Intent doesn't matter. A predator's still a predator. But outside the walls of the center, intent mattered very much. At her clinic apartment, Clara refreshed her phone every 10 minutes, watching comments stack like falling snow. I cried harder than I have in years. That's not just an animal, that's family. Protect her at all costs. She hadn't posted the wildfire clip herself. It came from a firefighter's niece, but Clara recognized the tide when it shifted. For every person calling Echo dangerous, 100 more were calling her a miracle. She opened the file on her laptop, the trail cam still of Echo pausing at the playground, eyes tilted toward a child in the window. She paired it with a single sentence and hit upload. Love doesn't forget. It exploded within hours. Up at the cabin, Sam had no interest in phones or headlines. He sat by the stove, the room thick with the scent of smoke that still clung to his coat. Echo lay stretched on the blanket, sides heaving in exhausted rhythm. Every so often she twitched, ears flicking as if the fire still roared in her dreams. Sam leaned forward, his voice low. "You did it, girl. You kept them safe." Echo didn't move, but one ear turned toward him. He smiled faintly, brushing soot from his hands. "They'll call it luck. They'll argue about instinct. But I know. You remembered." For a moment, the fire's crackle filled the silence between them, as warm and steady as a heartbeat. By the next day, news crews swarmed Granby. Vans with satellite dishes clogged the streets. Reporters shoved microphones toward anyone with a badge or a story. National anchors mispronounced Sam's name while replaying the clip in slow motion. Animal behaviorists debated live on television. "Conditioned response," said one. "Cross-species imprint," argued another. "Anthropomorphism," scoffed a third. But to the public, it wasn't science, it was story. A bobcat had remembered love. When a local reporter finally caught Sam outside the general store, microphone thrust toward him, he only said 6 words before hobbling away. "She kept her promise, that's all." And somehow those words spread faster than the video itself. For a week, the phones at the Penobscot Center never stopped ringing. Parents called with shaky voices, not to demand Echo's death, but to ask, is she safe? Letters poured in from strangers 3 states away, praising the bobcat that had walked boys out of fire. Even school children mailed drawings, Echo with a cape, Echo beside a campfire, Echo curled against an old man's boots. Public opinion had turned, and with it, the center's options narrowed. Doyle argued for relocation, even lethal force, but his words landed flat. The director finally said what no one else dared: "We don't have the authority to kill a miracle." And so the compromise was born. Just beyond the ridge at the edge of the center's grounds, crews marked off a long stretch of pine and rock. Not cages, not concrete. A corridor of forest itself, ringed by cedar posts and woven vine fencing. Wide enough for Echo to roam, thick enough to feel wild, but bordered just enough to ease the public's nerves. They called it the Sanctuary Glade. Others called it Echo's Promise. The first time Sam walked through the northern gate, he thought his legs might give way. His cane sank into damp earth, his heart knocking hard against his ribs. But when he sat down at the cedar stump they'd left in the middle clearing, the trees shifted and she appeared. No fanfare, no rush, just a shape slipping from the brush, her shoulders rolling in that slow, deliberate way that said she had never been gone at all. Sam didn't speak. He didn't need to. Echo circled once, twice, then settled beside him, her flank brushing the leather of his boot. On the other side of the fence, townsfolk watched in stunned quiet. Phones recorded, some cried, children pressed their faces to the gaps whispering. But inside the glade it was only Sam and Echo, the rhythm of old trust, settling like it had never broken. Every Saturday after, the ritual repeated. Sam arrived, Echo appeared, Sometimes she pressed her head into his knee. Sometimes she only stretched in the grass, tail flicking lazily. But always she came. Winter came early to northern Maine. Snow drifted in before Thanksgiving, laying a white hush across the lake and the pine corridors. Roads iced fast, and most folks huddled by their wood stoves, waiting for spring. But every Saturday, no matter the weather, Sam Whitaker made the walk to the sanctuary glade. The routine never changed. Clara would drive him as far as the trailhead, and Sam would insist on finishing the last stretch alone. "If I don't walk it," he told her once, "I don't earn it." The cane sank deeper in snow now, his shoulders stooped, his breath heavier, but Echo was always waiting. Sometimes she emerged slow, stretching from the trees. Other times she was already there, sitting regal by the cedar stump, ears pricked the moment Sam's boots crunched against the frost. They didn't need words. Sam would sit, pour coffee from his old thermos, sometimes reading aloud from dog-eared books, sometimes just watching the sky dim above the ridge. Echo lay near, not tame, not captive, but constant. As December deepened, Sam's steps faltered. Clara noticed how long he rested on the bench before standing, how his hands trembled when he poured coffee. "Maybe skip a week," she urged. He only smiled, tired but certain. "You don't skip family." Then came the morning when Echo waited, but Sam didn't come. She lingered at the northern gate, pacing once, then settling, golden eyes fixed on the empty path. Hours passed, snow fell, still she waited. The next Saturday, the same. At dawn on Monday, Clara found him in his recliner, blanket tucked around his shoulders, a book open on his lap, the heater humming low. Peaceful, as if he had simply chosen not to wake. On the counter lay a note in his steady, cramped hand. "If Echo comes looking, let her find me in the quiet. That's enough." The funeral was held outdoors in the grove beside the sanctuary, where the pines bent under snow. Friends, family, half the town gathered, breath rising in white clouds. They lowered a simple stone into the frozen ground, etched with his name. And as the final prayer faded, Echo appeared from the trees, silent, unhurried, unafraid. She walked past the mourners, past the whispers and gasps, and lay down beside the stone, pressed her body to the earth, and stayed, even as snow covered her fur. After Sam's funeral, the sanctuary changed, but it did not fall silent. Clara began walking the trail he had once taken, carrying a thermos of coffee and a book tucked under her arm. She never claimed his place, no one could, but she sat on the cedar stump where he had always rested. And Echo came. Not every day, not with the certainty she had for Sam, but often enough. She would emerge from the pines, circle once, then settle near Clara's boots, as if listening for a voice that still lingered in the clearing. Clara read aloud sometimes, the way her grandfather had. Other days she just poured 2 cups, setting one on the ground, though no hand would lift it. When she rose to leave, she always said the same words Sam had whispered at the end of every visit. "Same time next week?" Echo always blinked, slow, deliberate, as if to answer yes. In town, the story became more than news. It became legend. Schoolchildren drew pictures of Echo beside Sam's flannel coat. Teachers spoke of the sanctuary glade not as a prison, but as proof that love could outlast fear. Documentaries were filmed, articles written, but none of them captured what it meant to sit in that quiet and feel her eyes on you. The final question lingered for years. How did she remember him after all that time? Clara learned to smile when asked, repeating what her grandfather might have said. "You're asking the wrong question. It's not how Echo remembered him. It's how any of us could ever forget." And every evening, when the sun dipped low over the ridge, Echo would rise from the trees, pause by the cedar stump, and remind them all that some bonds never break.